All right. Hey, everyone, and welcome to our afternoon live session. We are back again in the Prairie Pollinator Garden. Back with us is Dr. Jovan Hill, and he is our expert on prairie ecosystems. And he's going to be telling you guys a lot about the species we have here, why it's important, so on and so forth. So follow us, and we'll show you what's going on.
All right. Hi, everyone. Again, Dr. Jovan Hill, Director of the Mississippi Entomological Museum. And I'm from Mississippi originally, and growing up here in the state, in Meridian, about 100 miles south of here. Grew up playing in the woods, going out, looking at the trees and flipping logs, looking at salamanders. And, didn't really think a lot about insects, and certainly didn't realize we had prairies in Mississippi. And once I came up to Starkville for college, I passed a sign one day in Lowndes County that said Black Prairie Wildlife Management Area. And I was like, well, what is this about? What is this about? We don't have prairies in Mississippi. I got to see what that is. So I went out there, looked around, didn't really see much. And it turns out that site had a long history of grazing and whatnot. But coming through college, started talking to people about prairies and realized that we do actually have prairies in Mississippi, and was able to get out to some actual good remnants and start learning about them. So we have two regions of prairie in Mississippi. One is the Black Belt Prairie, and the other is the Jackson Prairie. What our garden here represents is the Black Belt Prairie, which is what's located close to Starkville. Starkville is right on the western edge of it. And the reason we have prairie here and not elsewhere in the state is because of the distinctive soils. As you can see behind me, there's a lot of white looking rocks. What this is chalk. And it is just walk this way, follow me. This chalk is it's not like limestone. It's a crumbly kind of soft chalk. And if it gets wet, it turns it gets really gummy, gooey, really tenacious. If you walk out in it in winter, your shoes may weigh 10 pounds more when you come out of it. In the summer, it gets bone dry and cracks like this. Has a really high shrink swell capacity, so it's not good for growing trees. It goes from completely almost inundated, flooded situations, or saturated situations anyway in the winter, to dry, hard conditions in the summer, and you may get cracks in the ground that pull apart, and even like your houses will shift. All the houses in here, half the doors don't close for half the year a lot of times because the house is shifting. But what this chalk is, and you can see here some of the indentations of fossils. I don't have any I can just pull out and show you on hand, but there are huge oyster shells. There's an extinct genus of oyster, Exogyra, that you can find really commonly in these chalk formations. Shark's teeth, mosasaur fossils, and then the whole base material of the chalk itself is the fossils of tiny nanoplankton. So tiny little microorganisms that had calcium carbonate in their exoskeletons, and when they died in the Cretaceous period, which 60 to 300 million years ago, the Gulf of Mexico came up and made a crescent-shaped sort of embayment through Mississippi and Alabama and part of Tennessee, and all their calcareous exoskeletons were deposited over all these millions of years, and that's what forms the basis parent material for this chalk. So thinking about that, the high shrink swell capacity of these soils, it's very alkaline, very basic, high pH. So trees don't grow well in there with the exception of eastern red cedar. And cedar can come in and take over a prairie, but what maintains the prairie is fire. So you have to have these prairie soils, these right conditions, and the presence of fire to get a prairie. So over time, throughout, after the Cretaceous period coming into the Pleistocene, the plant communities of the eastern U.S. contracted and advanced and retreated with glaciation, and we wound up with prairie biota here. So basically, these are the same kind of prairies, eastern tallgrass prairie you would find in Kansas and Oklahoma, western Arkansas, very similar plant community and a somewhat similar insect community. An example right here, we'll come down here, is this purple prairie clover. So this plant right here is largely, if you ask most people where it's found, they would tell you, Kansas, Great Plains, somewhere like that. But we have disjunct populations here in Mississippi and Alabama that occur in the Black Belt Prairie. So thinking about prairies and biodiversity pollinators. So here we have a prairie plant that is utilized by at least 3 species specifically. So we have a bee, Tetralonia alabata, something like that, that utilizes its pollen, the pollen of this plant, to rear its young on. It's a very rare, very conservative bee. I've never actually seen it. It's incredibly fast. You'll hear it, and you probably won't ever see it. It's just like a quick buzz, and it hits the flower and it's gone. The other thing is the southern dog-faced butterfly. It's a southern dog-faced butterfly. It's a very conspicuous yellow and black butterfly that occurs across most of the U.S., even down into Argentina, I believe, and has recorded over 200 host species. However, the ones that occur here are locally adapted to utilize this purple prairie clover. We have another of their host plants here, the Baptisia, which I may show you later, that it utilizes in other areas. If you try to rear our the caterpillars of our southern dog-faced butterfly on anything other than the purple prairie clover, they will die after 1 or 2 molts or instars. But so they have to be reared on this prairie clover here. Another one is a mirrored little lace bug, tiny little insect with piercing and sucking mouth parts that eats the sap of this plant, and it can only live on this plant. So there's 3 insects right here that are dependent on this plant, not counting all the ones that will come to it and just eat it opportunistically or visit it for nectar or pollen otherwise. So thinking about this plant only occurs in prairies here in Mississippi and Alabama. So if we start losing our prairies, there's 3 species right off the bat from just losing this one plant. So you start putting together all the 300 plus plants that occur in a prairie system, and there's insects that are usually associated with each of those plants oftentimes. And we start losing those, it's one species of plant, but it may foster, 3 to even more species there. So it's not just you're losing one, you're losing more species on up the chain, and we're starting to see things like songbird collapse and all that because of this. So thinking about pollinators, this is a reason why conserving our natural ecosystems are very important, because we bring in plants from Europe, other places. The local bees here are not adapted to feeding on these other plants from other areas. They need the plants that they've evolved with, that they've spent thousands of years interacting with and learning to depend on. So if we have a nice lawn with other species of plants in it from other parts of the globe, this bee that only feeds on this, it's not going to use those for food to rear its young, and it's going to disappear. Those butterflies, if they don't have purple prairie clover in this area, they can feed on other plants elsewhere, but it's not very likely they're going to oviposit and then rear their young on a plant they're not going to succeed on. Walking along through here, here's something else that's kind of interesting. Here is a new species of plant that has been actually, so this is what we call like a hidden species. Let me raise it up a little. Yeah. This species, if you were to identify it right now, we would call it Cicericium, or we call it blue-eye grass. And a botanist from the University of West Alabama has started looking at this and realized that that's not actually what it is. It's actually a really undescribed species, and it's not something that's rare and you only find hidden in prairies here and there. This is a species that occurs in the Black Belt and Jackson Prairie, so it is limited in that respect, but it'll grow anywhere the conditions are right. So we saw it recently in a pasture situation where they mow bush hogs. See, this is a low growing plant, but one of the cool things about it is it blooms really early. So this is probably an important nectar source for a lot of early maturing bees, butterflies, even things that are maybe migrating through, like monarch butterflies. Um, but that's a new species that was just hidden in plain sight. It just took somebody knowing what to look for to recognize the differences between it and other species. Coming through here, here's another example of a great early flowering spring plant. This is Prairie Flocks here. Purple, pretty little pinkish purple flowers. So this species is a really good prairie indicator. Recently was out at a prairie site on some private property in Alabama, just east of here. And there was a lot of this blooming in abundance right at the transition between the prairie and an oak savanna. And it was just gorgeous. The understory was covered in this. And if you look, this is a great plant. It had great landscape potential. And this is a tremendous nectar source for a lot of early season bees and butterflies. And I bet even hummingbirds might utilize this a little bit. So again, linking our native plants to pollinators is very important. And we start thinking about losing these systems. That's how we start losing our native bees. And we hear a lot about bee decline recently. A lot of that has to do with honeybees, and that's more tied to diseases, mites, the way we transport them for usage in agriculture. But we are definitely losing our native pollinators, and it's because we're losing our native habitats. Our prairies here in Mississippi are declining because of conversion to agriculture, fire suppression, all those things. And that, in reality, those things happened a long time ago. One of the biggest things we see now is just development on prairies, where there are small prairies still in existence, but people just don't know what they are. They don't realize what they are, and they come in and may bulldoze them and stick a house on them, something like that. And so we're trying to educate people so that they can recognize the prairie plants, recognize the value of it, so that, look at this. This would be a great situation for a lawn or a garden around a house. And it would provide a lot more benefit to the local ecosystem than, say, a lawn with Bermuda grass, crepe myrtles, things like that you go to Lowe's and buy. But these things are just growing here, and they don't take a lot of maintenance because they evolved to live here in Mississippi with our heat and our humidity, hot temperatures. So, this is a very low maintenance garden, and it provides a wealth of benefit to the insects and other animals here. Looking around, here's a really cool one that we have blooming. This is Baptisia alba. You can see that. Yeah, you can see it good. So this is in the pea family. If you look at its flower, it looks a lot like a pea flower. This is a really good spring blooming plant, really good for bumblebees. They seem to like it a lot. And so this plant is important not just for the flower, but it makes a large fruit, actually, that like a pod almost, pea pod, that is full of tiny little seeds or beans. They look like tiny little lima beans almost. And there's a weevil that gets in those pods and lays its eggs, and the larvae eat those seeds. And so that weevil is dependent on this plant for its reproduction. And this thing makes enough seeds that the weevils probably don't do a lot of damage. I've seen some certainly healthy populations of it. They do lower the viability of some of the seeds, but it's nature. It all works out. So one more real quick. I think we're running out of time.
You probably got time for one more.
Okay. Here's a cool plant. This is Silphium perfoliatum. So when it gets mature, it's going to be taller than I am. And we'll have bright yellow sunflower looking flowers on it. I guess that's the term. So again, that's really good for pollinators. I see swallowtails and bees, all sort of things going to the flowers on that. But one other cool sort of adaptation of this plant or characteristic are the inside the petioles of these leaves right here. If you look, it's cupped right in here. Common name for this is cup leaf. And these cups, although we haven't had rain a little bit, but these cups will actually hold water. And so on a lot of days, you'll actually see wasps or birds drinking water out of those cups because it'll hold water for several days after a rain. So again, a good native plant, grows really well, can almost be weedy in some situations, but it's a great weed to have because it can provide cover and flowers and water for wildlife. It's great. So again, more than just, oh look here, we got a beetle. Here's a soldier beetle. I don't know if y'all can see it. Oh, he's running down there. So not just, look here. It's not just going in there for water. It can go in there for cover. It's somewhere for it to hide from predators, like me. So native plants provide all these benefits for insects and wildlife, and just all the more reason to use them. And just caught my eye right here. Blooming behind the silphium is a really gorgeous Amsonia. Look at this. So this plant here is actually endemic to the Black Belt Prairie. So you can only find this plant. There are other things related to it that occur elsewhere across eastern North America. But this plant here only grows in wet situations in the Black Belt. Historically, it probably grew in wet prairies or kind of lowland areas where prairies occurred, but we don't have a lot of those situations left anymore. So the most common area you find this now is wet roadside ditches in the Black Belt. And in fact, that's where this population came from. But this is a great pollinator plant, especially for wetland situations. And we have it growing here next to our prairie stream, and it's doing quite well.
All right. Thank you all so much for joining us today. This is our last live video themed. Tomorrow we will have at 10 o'clock to 10:30, hopefully, we will answer as many of your questions about insects and entomology as we can. That's Brady Dunaway there in the background.
Hello.
And we will have as many people on our team as we can answering those questions. So if you send this to them by tonight, we should be able to get good answers. If you send them tomorrow, they will be answers of some kind. So thank y'all so much for joining us. We will hopefully see you tomorrow.